Good morning, everybody. Today's agenda, we got to get through the reasons not only the United States stayed out of the war for as long as we did, but also ultimately the reasons why the United States eventually joined World War I on the Allied side. All right, got to put yourself into context. So it's 1914. Our president is Woodrow Wilson. Remember, Woodrow Wilson's foreign policy is moral diplomacy. He wants to make sure that we're only helping out democracies, capitalism, and that's what we're going to be pushing. Okay, so we're pushing that in Latin America. So if we're looking at the two sides, so the Central and the Allied powers, we have monarchs on both sides. So we have the Tsar in Russia, we have the Kaiser in Germany. We have the emperor in Austria-Hungary. So the United States is already starting out thinking, okay, we're gonna stay out of this, okay? But not everybody in the United States is agreeing with this policy. All right, so we wind up having kind of a split. All right, we have two movements that have been created. The first movement that's been created is called the peace movement. Okay, now the peace movement is mainly made up of populists, Midwestern progressives, so those same groups of people that followed Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson, pushing for those progressive outcomes that we learned about during our first unit. A lot of women's rights groups are also joining the peace movement because they don't want their sons going off to war on another continent for something that they don't truly believe in. So we have quite a few people, quite a few movements pushing to remain neutral and to stay peaceful. All right, so peace activists also in Congress insisted on the preparedness movement, because the preparedness movement, on the other hand, was saying that even if we're not going to join the war on Great Britain's side, because the preparedness movement had quite a few businessmen in it. And if you recall, during or after the Revolutionary War, one of our biggest buyers when it comes to our goods was Great Britain. So in order to protect our economy, we have the preparedness movement pushing forward as well, saying that even if we're not going to join in on World War I, we need to at least be prepared just in case we do have to join into World War I. Just to give you some context, the United States standing army was right around 100,000 people in 1914. That's about 20 times less than the German army in 1914. So one of the statements that the preparedness movement used to push the idea that we needed to grow our military and prepare for a possible war was, if we wind up getting pulled into this war and we're outnumbered 20-1, we're not going to have a shot. Okay. Now the peace movement, in order to try and diffuse the preparedness movement, said, fine, that's fine. We can prepare for war, but we want to make sure that we're using tax dollars and not just borrowing money in order to build up our military, thinking that would be a deterrent for the preparedness movement, saying that, okay, well, I don't want my tax dollars paying for this. We're just going to back off. Instead, the preparedness movement agreed to this. They said, yeah, fine, let's increase taxes in order to remain strong. And overall, the preparedness movement actually wound up winning out over the peace movement. Okay, we did start building up our military slowly. Woodrow Wilson was still quite the advocate for remaining peaceful and remaining neutral. Now, this isn't just because of these two groups. It's just because of the overall makeup of the United States and what it looked like during the 19 aughts, okay, the 10s, and then ultimately up until the 20s. So during the Progressive era, during the Gilded Age, we have quite a few immigrants coming into the United States, and most of these immigrants were coming from Western and Central Europe. So all those European countries that were currently um, taking part in this war. Now, because we are a nation of immigrants, the a lot of these immigrants viewed themselves as quote unquote hyphenated Americans. Okay, now what that means is you're not just an American. A lot of people viewed themselves as, if you came from Ireland or if your family came from Ireland, you're Irish American, so you're hyphenated, or you're German American, or you're Polish American, and so on. All right, and because there were so many quote unquote hyphenated Americans in the United States at this point, Woodrow Wilson and Congress was afraid that if we declared war on one side or the other, we would wind up having violence at home, because people still felt that draw back to their original home country. All right, because people were still feeling that. Still felt the sympathies towards the Central Powers, if they're German Americans or Austro-Hungarians or Italians. All right. Now the support for the Allies, on the other hand, so support for the Central Powers were mainly coming from those hyphenated Americans. All right. The Irish believed that if the Central Powers wound up winning, that they would be able to, or Ireland would be able to push for some semblance of independence. So even though the Irish technically were a part of the United Kingdom at this point, they were actually pulling for the Central Powers, because the Irish were treated so poorly by the British for forever. All right. Now on the other side, the Allies were supported within the United States because of those autocratic, or those monarchies that we saw mainly on the Central Power side. All right, so in German, we had a lot of anti-Kaiser propaganda, which we'll take a look at tomorrow. That was basically there to try and sway public opinion of many Americans against the Central Powers. Now this became much more prevalent when the transatlantic cable was cut by the Allied powers. Okay, so the transatlantic cable was a telegram cable that connected Germany to New York. All right, so it's a telegram cable that actually went through the ocean. So Great Britain winds up cutting this cable, which cuts off all communication from Germany to the United States. So all the information that was coming in about World War I only was coming from the Allies' point of view. So we were getting bias information. So all of this propaganda was coming in, talking about how awful the war was and how terrible the Central Powers were and what they were doing. And that was helping to sway that public opinion away from the Central Powers, or away from neutrality, and pushing Americans closer and closer to supporting the Allies. Another reason why the United States ultimately joined World War I on the Allied side was because of German submarine warfare. All right. This is our first industrialized war, and the Germans actually were far superior to the Allied nations with their U-boat technology. These U-boats during World War I, there were U-boats prior to World War I. They weren't very good. We had like this Turtle back during the Revolutionary War, which still it didn't fully submerge. It just was like 3/4 underwater, and then you had like what it looked like a shell coming out of the water. So if like a cannonball hit the shell, it would just ricochet off. U-boats during World War I, however, were going fully submersible. Now, when they were riding on top of the water, so they were above water, they would run mainly on diesel engines. They also had artillery on top of their boats, so they would be able to fire from that. But they were truly deadly because of their stealth. All right. So when they would go underwater, they would change from those diesel engines into an electric engine. That way, that carbon dioxide and all of those chemicals coming out from the exhaust from those diesel engines wouldn't hurt the people within. Now, these U-boats originally started just knocking out those Allied boats, but Great Britain in turn wound up blockading Germany. All right, so no goods were going to be able to get into Germany, which caused a massive famine, which we'll talk about more here in a little bit. All right, but these U-boats, instead of just attacking Allied, military, they started attacking merchant ships as well. Okay, so any merchant ships that were bringing goods to the Allied powers were going to be sunk by these U-boats, many of which wound up being Americans. Now, because of that transatlantic cable being cut, again, we weren't getting any information out of Germany. We were only gaining information from the Allied powers. So, and now our merchant ships are now being attacked and Americans are dying because of that blockade that was on Germany and the U-boat blockade that was being used to prevent goods from getting into Great Britain. All right. Now, one ship sinking in particular gained national attention in America, and that was the sinking of the Lusitania. All right, so this is a picture of the Lusitania sinking. Okay, it's not like a real picture or anything like that, but the Lusitania was a British ocean liner. Okay, so it's like a cruise ship. There were 128 Americans on board, and the Germans believed that the Lusitania was sneaking in military supplies into Great Britain. Now, because of that, they wound up sinking the Lusitania. All right, and by sinking the Lusitania, they wound up killing 128 Americans. Very similar to the USS Maine. Okay, so when the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, the American populace got behind the United States and said, okay, we need to go after Spain. All right, this happened in 1915, however. The United States didn't join the war until 1917. So when the Lusitania sunk, we didn't immediately join World War I, but we started upping our preparedness movement, preparing for war, as well as the public opinion just turning against Germany in general. Okay, so President Wilson openly protests Germany for what they were doing. Germany didn't stop what they were doing. They continued sinking ships. Germany asked the United States to get Britain to end their blockade on Germany, and then therefore they would stop, sinking these ships. But the British refused to do so. Okay, they refused to do so, and because of that, Germany continued their unrestricted submarine warfare. And what that means is that they would continue using their stealth and their torpedoes and sinking ships without warning. All right, restricted or unrestricted just means that you're not giving people a heads up that you're about to shoot on them, but or fire on them. And restricted would mean that you would then have to like come out of the water almost and go, hey, we're about to attack you, and then go back under the water and fire at these merchant ships. All right. Now, this all happened in 1915, okay, which 1915 is a run-up to an election year, which is very similar to what we're in. And we've seen, what has happened in our election, that politicians, they're going to make sure that what they're doing is hopefully popular to their base in order to get those votes. So in 1916, because we still weren't in World War I, even though we were supplying the Allies with weapons, which was helping our economy quite a bit, Woodrow Wilson ran under the flag of he kept us out of war. All right, that was one of his major slogans, was that that he kept us out of war. And because of that, he wound up winning the election of 1916, which is funny because within a year, the United States was in World War I fighting. All right, but leading up to that point, we have unrestricted submarine warfare, which is causing the United States population to start turning away from the Central Powers and more towards those allies. Again, we're still supplying allies with weapons, so it's helping our economy. So really, it's only a matter of time before the United States winds up getting pulled into this. But we have to remember, Woodrow Wilson's foreign policy, he does not want to help autocrats and the monarchies. And there's a monarchy on that allied side. So the United States, that's a big point of tension between the allies and the United States. At least Woodrow Wilson and the allies was, okay, he's almost saying, okay, I see where you guys are coming from, but you have a czar, and I don't agree with this. Therefore, I don't think that we can join this war. All right. Now, after the sinking of the Lusitania on May 7th, 1915, the United States and Germany get together, and Germany winds up signing a pledge. Okay, it's called the Sussex Pledge, which you need to know what the Sussex Pledge is. All right, the Sussex Pledge was just the German government promising that U-boats would warn ships before attacking. All right, so they would come above water, they'd go, hey, we're going to fire at you, and then they would go back down, and they would fire at these boats. All right, now these are like merchant liners and like sea liners like the Lusitania. They're not talking about they have to like come out of the water and like wave at a battleship and go, okay, we're going to fire on you now. All right, it only has to do with non-military ships. Okay, so this was supposed to fix the tension between the United States and Germany when it comes to this unrestricted submarine warfare, firing on these ships that technically aren't military ships. So it's a Band-Aid. Okay, we put a Band-Aid on the problem, but unfortunately, Germany, like almost right after they signed the Sussex Pledge, went right back to sinking these liners and these non-military ships. So the Sussex Pledge, in theory, was a great idea, but it fell apart almost immediately. All right, so what impact did the war have at home? So ultimately, why does the United States join World War I? Okay, so that British blockade that I mentioned earlier, the British blockade, if you look at a map of Europe, blockaded the North Sea. So no shipments would be able to get into Germany. Okay, but this also stopped shipments of fertilizer and food getting into Germany as well. Now, because these U.S. merchant ships seldom reached Germany, by 1917 there was a major famine, so a lack of food, in which thousands of Germans were dying because of the difficulty of not only importing food into Germany, but also importing fertilizer into Germany in order to allow farmers within Germany to grow that food. So the British blockade was very effective. All right, so that unrestricted submarine warfare was supposed to, hopefully for the Germans' sake, put that same kind of blockade on Great Britain, in which both populations were hurting and starving. So hopefully both sides would be able to lift those blockades. But the British blockade was much more effective than the German blockade was. All right. Now, by 1917, because of the preparedness movement, the U.S. had mobilized for war against the Central Powers. Okay, so what does that mean? It ensures, basically, the United States was giving out loans to the Allied powers. Okay, saying that by 1917, the United States had already loaned out $2.25 billion of loans out to these countries that were at war. So the United States was thinking, okay, well, we need to make sure that we can get back our money. All right. We're also worried about our ships and our economy. and Germany was sinking those ships. So obviously, we weren't too happy about that, okay, because it was threatening the U.S. economy. All right. So the United States was the biggest wartime creditor throughout World War One, meaning we were giving out loans left and right. So Great Britain received $3.7 billion. France received $1.9 billion, and Italy, when they eventually became an ally, they received $1 billion, and a total of $7 billion. It's a lot of money back then. All right, but what's crazy is the allies, these three countries, didn't like fully repay these World War debts until like 2 decades ago. All right, so for years they had been paying back these World War I debts that they gained in 1917. All right, but I want you to notice that by 1917, I mean, we were only giving money out to the Allied powers. We weren't giving money out to the Central Powers. So because of that propaganda, because of the sinking of the Lusitania, because of that unrestricted submarine warfare, the United States has already picked a side. Okay, it's pretty obvious that the United States is supporting the Allies without actually going to war with them. All right, now the final nail in the coffin of the Central Powers was when the Zimmerman telegram, or the Zimmerman note, which we'll take a look at shortly, was intercepted by Great Britain. Okay, the Zimmerman was named Arthur Zimmerman. He was the foreign minister, which is like our Secretary of State for Germany. Okay, now this German foreign minister wound up sending a telegram to Mexico. All right, asking the Mexican government to attack the United States. All right, you got to think about what the political landscape was between Mexico and the United States at this time. If you remember from our last unit, the American imperialism unit under Woodrow Wilson sent Marines down to Mexico to stop weapons from getting into Mexico because we didn't support their dictator. All right, so only a couple of years after that, we have the Germans now reaching out to Mexico, trying to play on unresolved anger between the United States and Mexico, and asking Mexico to jump into the war with Germany by attacking the United States. The idea behind this was that if the United States was preoccupied with Mexico, we no longer could send, money and supplies to the Allied powers in Europe, and then Germany would be able to concentrate on those Allied powers while we were, concentrating on Mexico. Now, neither Mexico or President Wilson really took the Zimmerman note seriously, but because it was published and the American population saw this, it was very similar to the Delome letter. All right, that in the Spanish-American War, talking badly about our president at the time, President McKinley. So now we have another note from the Central Powers saying, "Hey, Mexico, if you get involved in this war and we wind up winning, we'll help you regain, Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and all of those places that you wound up losing during the Mexican-American War." Now, luckily, like I said, Mexico didn't really take this seriously, but the Zimmerman note and unrestricted submarine warfare were really your two major causes of the United States joining the war on the Allied side. Now, eventually, the United States does declare war on Germany. So in April of 1917, America declares war on Germany and the Central Powers. And the way that Woodrow Wilson asks Congress to do it is he basically makes the point that we have to make the world safe for democracy. Now, the reason why he now is able to say this is because the Russian monarchy fell apart. Okay, they were overthrown by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, okay, soon to be known as, the Soviet Union or that Communist Party, okay. Germany was actually pretty smart in this case. Vladimir Lenin actually got kicked out of Russia because of his communist ideas. And one of the things that in the Marxist theory of communism, for communism to work, is you need class warfare. All right, so the lower class is supposed to rise up and take out the upper class, and then over time, government goes away and creates this utopia. All right, so because of that, Lenin got kicked out. He got sent to Switzerland. Well, Germans wound up finding this guy and snuck him back into Russia, in which he continued building a support system for Bolshevism. Now, this is all happening when World War I is taking place, and the Russians are just getting absolutely annihilated by the Germans in World War I. They just don't have the weapons in order to keep up. And because of that, the Russian people were upset with the Tsar. Okay, now Tsar means Caesar in Russian. Okay, but the Tsar, or the leader of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II, who is cousins with the Kaiser Wilhelm and King George, is actually murdered by the Bolsheviks at this time in 1917. He and his family were at their winter estate. The Bolsheviks wind up going to the winter estate, breaking in, taking his entire family down into the basement, and wind up murdering them. Okay, they wind up shooting all of them, including the kids. Now there's a story of a young girl named Anastasia. All right, there's a Disney movie about this, about basically like the lost Russian Tsar's daughter. Okay, there's a theory that one of the kids got away and she lived in hiding, and then years later, an older lady came out and said, "Hey, I'm Anastasia," and it was very strange because she knew all of these different things about the Russian Tsar that only somebody close to the Russians would actually know, or the Russian Tsar would actually know. All right. There's no proof that this actually occurred, meaning that woman was actually Anastasia, but it's a fun fact. Okay, so the Russian Tsar is gone. Okay, so the Bolsheviks wind up taking over and pulling Russia out of World War I. Okay, so after the Russian Tsar is gone, that was like the last reason why the United States was staying out of World War I. Okay, we didn't want to support an autocrat. We have moral diplomacy. We only want to spread democracy and support democracies, and now we can do that. All right, so because of the Zimmerman Note, because of all those U-boats sinking American ships, so after the Sussex Pledge was signed, 4 more American merchant ships were sunk. Eventually, in April of 1917, America finally declares war on Germany. All right, and that's where we're going to stop for today.